The widow stood bound to the post, wrists tied so tight the rope cut her skin. The sun burned high above the New Mexico dust, but it was not the heat that stung her. It was the whip. 99 times it had cracked against her back. 99 times her knees had buckled, yet she had refused to fall. The crowd gathered in the square did not cheer. Some turned away. Some covered their children's eyes. Others leaned forward, waiting for the 100th lash, the one that was supposed to break her. Silas McGraw sat tall in his saddle, boots polished, hat shadowing his eyes. He owned the cattle that grazed the valley. He owned the water that cut through the land, and he believed he owned her too. But Evelyn Hart had said no. No to his hand, no to his wealth, no to his threats, and for that, she was paying the price in front of everyone. But what kind of town lets a woman suffer for refusing a man? And what kind of power keeps a sheriff silent while a widow is whipped to the bone? The sheriff stood stiff at the edge of the platform, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the dirt. His badge caught the sunlight, but he made no move to stop the punishment. McGraw's men surrounded the square, rifles across their chests, daring anyone to interfere. Who would risk their life for a widow with no family, no land, and no allies? Evelyn knew the answer. No one. And yet she would not give Silas McGraw what he wanted. She had lost a husband once to the land's cruelty. She would not lose her soul to greed. The whip cracked again in the hangman's hands, curling in the air like a serpent ready to strike. The crowd held its breath. Some prayed under their breath. Others whispered that no woman could endure one lash more. Yet Evelyn's eyes, though wet with blood and sweat, searched the faces before her. Not with shame, not with pleading, but with defiance. 99 lashes had not bent her spirit, and that terrified the man who thought he owned her. What would the 100th lash bring? The end of her strength, or the beginning of something none of them could stop? They did not know yet, but one thing was certain. The last strike would not land as McGraw intended, and when it came, everything in that dusty square would change. Evelyn Hart had not always lived under the shadow of Silas McGraw. Once she and her husband had tended a small patch of land beyond the cottonwoods, where the soil was poor but theirs to work. John Hart had built the cabin board by board, his calloused hands steady even when the winds howled across the plains. He died young, a fever that no doctor could stop. The land passed to Evelyn, and with it came the eyes of the man who coveted more than cattle. Silas McGraw rode to her door less than a month after the funeral. His horse was glossy, his clothes pressed fine, his voice smooth as creek water. He spoke of protection, of neighbors watching out for neighbors. But she saw through it. He wanted her land. He wanted her name tied to his. He wanted what grief had left her too weary to defend. "You'll need someone strong," he told her, one boot propped on the step. "You'll need someone who can keep the wolves away." Evelyn had stared back, hands rough from work, voice quiet but firm. "I've buried one husband. I won't sell myself to another." That answer should have ended it, but Silas McGraw was not a man who heard no. He leaned close, his shadow falling across her doorway. "Think hard, Widow Hart. Men who live alone don't last. Women, they don't even get that chance." His words were meant as warning, but they carried a promise. And from that day forward, the widow knew she had been marked. The town whispered soon after. Neighbors who once shared bread began to cross the street. Shopkeepers cut her short, eyes darting toward McGraw's men at the counter. She was not accused outright, but rumor was sharper than rope. A woman who rejected a man of power? What did that say about her? What secret pride gave her the right? What defiance was she hiding? One night she found her shed burned to ash, the earth around it still smoking when the dawn broke. Nothing inside but her husband's old saddle, blackened and ruined. She stood staring at the ruin while McGraw's riders passed on the ridge, their laughter carrying in the morning wind. Coincidence or warning? Evelyn tightened her shawl around her shoulders and returned to her cabin, but she knew then that refusing Silas had made her more than a widow. It had made her an enemy. And enemies of Silas McGraw did not live in peace for long. So when the sheriff came days later, papers in his hand telling her she had been called to answer for dishonor, she understood. The trial was no trial at all. It was the rancher's will, written in ink and carried out in public. And when she stood accused, the crowd never asked whether she was guilty. They only asked what the sentence would be. The trial was called in the old town hall, though no one mistook it for justice. The benches creaked with neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, the smell of sweat and dust thick in the air. A Bible rested on the table, but no hand was asked to swear upon it. The sheriff cleared his throat, but his eyes never left the floorboards. Everyone already knew whose voice would carry the day. Silas McGraw stood tall, hat in hand, as if this gathering were nothing more than Sunday service. He spoke of order, of respect, of the law that held their settlement together. But what law was it? His own. He said Evelyn Hart had insulted him in public, refused his rightful offer, and shamed his good name. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others silent, but none dared to raise their voice. Evelyn stood alone, her wrists bare, her black dress playing against the polished boots of McGraw's men. She spoke only once, her voice steady enough to cut through the whispers. My husband's grave is still fresh in the ground. I will not stand here accused of sin for keeping his memory. For a moment, the room quieted, but truth weighs little when silver speaks louder. McGraw's foreman whispered to the sheriff. The sheriff gave a stiff nod, his hands trembling as he unfolded the paper. The widow is guilty of dishonor, he read. Her punishment is to be carried out publicly. 99 lashes of the whip. The words cracked through the room, heavier than gunfire. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered, too much. But silence won as it always did. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she did not plead. She did not bow her head. She knew better than to beg mercy from men who had none. And as the sheriff rolled the paper closed, McGraw leaned back, satisfied. He had taken her name. He would take her strength. And when the first lash fell, the town would know that no woman, no matter how stubborn, could say no to Silas McGraw and remain whole. The square was silent, except for the sound of rope tightening around wood. Evelyn Hart's wrists were bound high, the post rough against her cheek. The sheriff gave the signal, though his voice carried no conviction. The hangman lifted the whip. Its leather coils hissed as they unraveled in the sun. And then it struck. The first lash split the air like thunder. Evelyn's body jerked, but her knees held. The crowd flinched as one, mothers pulling children close. Some turned their heads. Others leaned forward, eager. Every face carried the same question. How long could she endure? Silas McGraw watched from his saddle, his smile thin as a blade. This was his law in motion, his power stretched across the square for all to see. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The whip spoke for him. By the 10th lash, Evelyn's dress hung in tatters at her back. Her breath came ragged, but her eyes remained fixed ahead. Not down, not broken. That defiance unsettled the crowd. What punishment loses its weight when the victim refuses to bow? What man's authority trembles when the whip fails to crush the spirit it seeks? At 20 lashes, someone in the crowd muttered, "Enough." A rifle butt slammed into the dirt, silencing the protest before it became more. McGraw's riders scanned the faces, daring anyone to speak again. The whip cracked once more, curling across skin already bleeding. At 30 lashes, Evelyn whispered her husband's name. Just his name. Barely a sound, but those close enough to hear felt the chill of it. For though her body faltered, her soul still stood beside the man she had lost. Could a widow's love outlast pain? Could memory shield flesh from breaking? The count went on. 40, 50. The air grew heavy with the stench of sweat and iron. The crowd shifted, unease spreading like fire under ash. Somewhere in the throng, a stranger stood apart. Tall, dark hair braided down his shoulder, a scar across his jaw. He said nothing. He only watched. His name was not yet known to the people gathered, but his silence carried weight. Taza. By 70 lashes, Evelyn's knees quivered, yet she clung to the ropes, her jaw locked. McGraw leaned forward in his saddle now, impatient. Why did she not collapse? Why did she not cry for mercy? Every strike that failed to break her only deepened his fury. He's at 90 lashes. The whip fell with such force that the crowd gasped aloud. Evelyn's head sagged, her lips bloodied, but still she refused to beg. Even children could see it now. She was not merely enduring. She was resisting. And then the 99th lash landed. The hangman raised his arm again, ready for the last. The crowd held its breath. Some prayed, some turned away. All knew the 100th lash was coming. It was meant to finish her. It was meant to prove McGraw's power absolute. But Evelyn's eyes opened. Blood streaked down her face, and she stared straight at him. Defiance burned hotter than pain. 99 lashes had not broken her. And that truth struck harder than the whip. The square was breathless. Dust hung in heat. The whip dangled from the hangman's fist, its leather darkened with blood. 99 strikes had been delivered. One more would end it. Or so they thought. The sheriff gave a nod. The hangman raised his arm. The crowd shifted, torn between pity and fear. McGraw leaned forward, waiting for the widow to collapse at last. The 100th lash was meant to erase her defiance. It was meant to prove him untouchable. But Evelyn Hart lifted her head. Her face was bloodied, her back raw, yet her gaze burned steady. She looked straight at Silas McGraw, unblinking, unbroken. And in that single stare, the balance of the square shifted. What power is left to a man when pain no longer bends its target? What fear remains when a woman refuses to bow? The whip snapped forward, but it did not land. A hand caught it in midair. Strong fingers clenched around leather, halting its strike. The crowd gasped, some stumbling back. The hangman froze, his eyes wide. Standing before the widow was the stranger from the crowd, tall and silent, his presence sudden as a storm. Taza. For the first time he spoke, his voice carried like stone breaking loose. It ends here. McGraw's smile vanished. His men reached for rifles, but not before the crowd itself rippled with shock. Someone had stepped between the widow and her punishment. Someone had broken the circle of fear. The sheriff's hand twitched near his revolver, but even he hesitated. No one had expected this. No one had thought the 100th lash could be denied. Yet there the stranger stood, whip in hand, eyes dark with promise. The silence was heavier than gunfire, and in that silence the truth set in. Evelyn Hart had endured 99 lashes for defiance, but the 100th had changed everything. The square exploded into chaos. McGraw's men lunged forward, rifles lifted, but the crowd surged between them. Mothers pulled children away. Men stumbled in panic, dust rising in a choking cloud. Some shouted for order, others only screamed. The sheriff barked a command he couldn't enforce. For the first time, the rancher's grip on the town slipped. Taza ripped the whip from the hangman's hands and cut the rope binding Evelyn's wrists. She sagged against the post, her back torn and bleeding. He caught her before she hit the ground. His eyes flicked once toward McGraw, steady, unafraid, then turned away. He had no words for the rancher, only action. McGraw's voice thundered above the din. "Stop them!" His riders shoved through the square, horses rearing, spurs flashing. But Taza was already moving. With Evelyn in his arms, he cut through the crowd like water through reeds. No bullet dared fly while townsfolk clogged the path, but the threat hung close behind. By the time they reached the riverbank beyond the mill, Evelyn stirred. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her head against his chest. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, almost broken. Taza said nothing. His silence carried its own weight. What could words mean when the only truth was choice? They crossed the shallows, water darkening the blood on Evelyn's torn dress. Behind them, shouts echoed, horses splashing into the ford. McGraw's men were close, too close. Evelyn forced herself upright, stumbling from Taza's grip. She would not be carried like broken cargo. She would run, even if each step seared her flesh. The desert opened wide before them, red rock, dry wind, sagebrush bending under the sun. Nowhere to hide, no cover but the ridges. Yet Taza did not falter. He knew these lands as McGraw never would. He guided Evelyn toward the cliffs, toward the places where shadows clung even in daylight. Gunfire cracked. A bullet kicked sand at their heels. Another tore splinters from the rocks beside them. Evelyn gasped, stumbling, but Taza pulled her behind a boulder, shielding her body with his own. He scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. The hunters had numbers, but they lacked patience. The desert belonged to him. "Can we outrun them?" Evelyn asked, voice shaking, more anger than fear. Taza looked at her, then at the horizon. His answer came in a single word, low and certain. Yes. The chase carried them deeper into the wasteland. Every hoofbeat of pursuit echoed like a drum of war. But with each step, Evelyn's strength returned, not to her body, but to her will. She had survived 99 lashes. She had endured the shame of the square. Now she would endure this too. Behind them, McGraw's voice carried over the rocks, harsh and vengeful. "Find them! Bring her back alive! Kill him if you must!" The desert wind swallowed his command, and in that wind the widow and the warrior vanished into shadow. When Evelyn woke, she was no longer in the desert. A fire crackled low beside her, its smoke rising into the cool night air. Her wounds had been washed and wrapped with strips of soft leather. She lay on a woven mat inside a circle of tents stitched from hides. Voices murmured nearby, measured and deliberate, as if each word carried weight. She tried to sit, but pain lanced through her back. A woman stepped forward, younger than Evelyn, with dark hair bound neatly and eyes that studied her with guarded caution. The woman placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke in a tongue Evelyn did not know. The tone was not cruel nor kind, simply firm. Rest. Across the fire, men and women gathered, their faces solemn. An elder spoke first, his voice calm but edged with authority. He gestured toward Evelyn, then toward Taza, who stood silent with his arms folded. Though she could not understand the words, she understood the meaning. Why had he brought her here? Why risk their people for an outsider? Taza finally answered. His words were short, his tone unwavering. The camp listened. Some frowned, some nodded, others whispered. Evelyn's heart pounded. Were they debating her life? Would they turn her back to Silas McGraw's riders? Would they send her into the desert to die alone? A child crept forward, no more than 7, clutching a carved wooden horse. He stared at her, wide-eyed, curious. Evelyn forced a faint smile despite the pain. The boy tilted his head, studying her scars, then returned to his mother's side. Even in that small moment, Evelyn felt the weight of their watchfulness. She was being judged not by chains or whips now, but by something far older. Trust. Night deepened. Food was brought. Meat roasted on the fire. Water drawn from a clay jug. Evelyn's hands trembled as she ate. She felt every gaze upon her, measuring, questioning. What did she bring into their lives? Danger? Strength? Or both? At last the elder spoke again, his staff striking the ground. His words drew silence. He looked at Evelyn, then at the flames, as if searching for an answer written in firelight. Taza inclined his head but said nothing further. The decision was not his alone. It belonged to them all. Evelyn lay back, staring into the night sky. She had survived McGraw's whip, survived the chase across the desert. But her fate now rested with a people she did not know, who owed her nothing. And as sleep pulled her under, one question burned louder than the pain in her back. When dawn came, would they choose to shelter her, or cast her out to meet McGraw's wrath alone? Silas McGraw did not sleep that night. He sat in his ranch house with a lantern burning low, the shadows cutting deep across his face. On the table before him lay the whip, coiled and stained. 99 lashes had not broken the widow. Worse, someone had dared to stop the 100th, his 100th. That insult cut deeper than any blade. By dawn, riders gathered in his yard, men who owed him wages, men who feared him more than law. Their horses stamped restlessly, breath clouding in the cold. McGraw stood on the porch, coat drawn tight, voice carrying sharp through the morning air. They think they can hide her among the tribes. They think we'll forget. I'll show them what forgetting costs. He promised coin, he promised cattle. But more than that, he promised vengeance. And vengeance was a fire men gladly carried if it meant spilling blood in his name. Rifles were checked, torches bound in rags and dipped in pitch. Saddlebags rattled with ammunition. Every man there knew what McGraw intended. It was not a rescue. It was a raid. The sheriff came, pale and uneasy, but McGraw silenced him with a glance. "You'll keep the town quiet," McGraw said. "We'll handle the rest." The sheriff swallowed his protest and stepped back. Who dares defy the man who owns the valley's water? The riders set out before the sun cleared the hills. Hooves struck sparks against stone. Dust rose in their wake. McGraw rode at the front, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the mountains rose dark and jagged. He knew where the Apache camp lay. He had avoided it for years, out of caution, out of respect. But respect was gone now. In its place was fury. As the company wound through the canyon, one rider leaned close. "What of the widow? Do we take her alive?" McGraw's jaw tightened. His answer came low, cold. "She'll kneel when I bring her back, or she won't rise at all." The torches flickered in the morning wind. Steel glinted, and somewhere beyond the ridges, the camp sat in silence, unaware of the storm about to fall upon it. The first sound was the thunder of hooves. Then came the crack of rifles. The Apache camp stirred to life before the sun was high. Children pulled into tents, women dragging water to douse the first flames. The riders poured in from the canyon, torches raised, gunfire echoing against the stone walls. Evelyn staggered from her shelter, her body weak but her mind sharpened by terror. She saw the riders sweeping in, McGraw at their head, his coat whipping in the wind. The man who had taken 99 lashes from her back had now brought fire to finish what the whip could not. Taza was already there, bow in hand, moving like a shadow between tents. Arrows hissed through the smoke, striking riders from their saddles. The Apache fought as one, calm, fierce, measured. They defended their own with the strength of centuries, but McGraw had numbers, and his men were drunk on rage. A torch landed near the fire circle. Flames leapt, swallowing hide tents, smoke curling into the sky. Evelyn coughed, eyes stinging, heart pounding. She wanted to flee, but her legs carried her forward instead. Could she hide again while others burned for sheltering her? Could she run when she was the reason they were under attack? McGraw's voice rang out above the gunfire. "Find her! The widow is mine!" His eyes locked on her through the haze. He spurred his horse hard, breaking through the fight, bearing down on her with whip coiled in his fist. Taza moved to intercept, but McGraw's men swarmed him. Gun butts cracked, fists swung, dust and blood mingled. Evelyn was left standing alone in the center of the storm, the rancher closing fast. He dismounted in a rush, boots striking the ground, whip in hand. His face was twisted with triumph and rage. 99 wasn't enough," he snarled. "You'll crawl this time." Evelyn's back screamed with pain. Her body begged to fall, but her hands clenched into fists. She would not crawl. Not now. Not ever. McGraw swung the whip, its lash slicing the air toward her once more. But this time she caught it. Her hands closed on the leather, blood slick on her palms. The crowd of battle seemed to fade around them. Only she and McGraw remained, bound together by the weapon that had scarred her flesh. He yanked, but she held fast. The widow who had endured 99 lashes would not be broken by the 100th. With a cry torn from somewhere deeper than pain, she spun the whip from his grip and lashed it back. The crack split the air. McGraw stumbled, shock written across his face. A second strike fell, and the man who thought himself untouchable collapsed to the dirt. His own weapon turned against him, his own cruelty brought down by the one he sought to destroy. Around them, the fight wavered. McGraw's men, seeing their leader fall, faltered. The Apache pressed forward, forcing them back into the canyon. Smoke and dust swirled, victory echoing in the silence that followed. Evelyn stood trembling, the whip falling from her hands. Her body was broken, but her spirit had never stood taller. 99 lashes had tried to bury her, but the 100th had set her free. The smoke thinned by evening. The riders who had come with fire and fury were gone, their horses scattering into the canyon. Some lay in the dust, weapons abandoned, their loyalty to McGraw buried beside him. Silence crept back into the camp, broken only by the crackle of dying flames. Evelyn sat near the embers, her back wrapped in clean bandages. Pain pulsed with every breath, but for the first time in weeks, her chest rose without fear. She looked to the faces around her, children safe in their mother's arms, men and women rebuilding what had been torn down. They had fought not for her, but alongside her, and in that fight, she had become something more than a widow marked by shame. Taza approached, his steps steady, his eyes calm. He carried no weapon now, only a cup of water. He set it beside her and nodded once. Few words had passed between them, yet none were needed. Trust was not given lightly. It was earned in fire. The elder spoke that night beneath the stars. His voice was low, his words deliberate. Though Evelyn could not understand the language, she felt their weight. His gaze lingered on her, not as a stranger, but as one who had stood her ground when others tried to bury her in dust. What becomes of a woman who endures 99 lashes? What becomes of a spirit that refuses to bend beneath the cruelty of men? The town had thought her broken. Silas McGraw had thought her conquered, yet she was here still, standing among those who had seen her defiance and found it worthy. As the flames died low, Evelyn raised her eyes to the sky. The stars were sharp, endless, unbound. She was scarred, yes, but not defeated. She was widowed, yes, but not alone. She had been whipped nearly to death, hunted through desert stone, cast into fire, and she had risen. The widow had taken 99 lashes for saying no, but the 100th lash had not broken her. It had delivered her freedom.